B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. Happy Halloween. October is almost over. It's Friday, October 30th, 2020. And the reaction to Glenn Greenwald's resignation from the Intercept, which we led with yesterday here on the podcast, has produced fascinating reaction. And to me, it helps us define who the real journalists are and who are the pack of self-styled gatekeepers who believe that reporting has to be tailored or filtered to meet political goals or political requirements, depending on how they are viewed. And if you haven't had a chance yet to catch up with yesterday's podcast, why don't you listen to that first and then come back and catch up here? Because I don't want to rehash Greenwald's arguments more than necessary, and I want to bring you additional commentary about the resignation that he announced. First up, at The Intercept, Betsy Reed, the editor-in-chief, is now shown as the author of a statement that was posted yesterday without any identifying factor of who wrote it. And she gets really snarky. And her defensiveness makes for a good offense, right? That this is Greenwald throwing a tantrum, demanding to be treated like no other reporter. She writes, Glenn demands the absolute right to determine what he will publish. He believes that anyone who disagrees with him is corrupt, and anyone who presumes to edit his words is a censor. Now, what Ms. Reed is not acknowledging is that she came to The Intercept after Glenn Greenwald had established it with Jeremy Scahill and the deep pockets of Pierre Omidyar. And envisioning just such an episode as this one, Greenwald got written into his contract that he may publish without being edited. Now, very few people enjoy that level of freedom. I'm operating here on a much smaller level than The Intercept, but I do enjoy the freedom. There's nobody who tells me what to do. I ad-lib these comments every day, so there's no script and there's no editor who goes over my script and tells me, don't say that, Peter. And so I am, as Joni Mitchell once sang, unfettered and alive. And so this is a crock of shit for Betsy Reed to open her announcement that Greenwald has resigned by attacking him for being a petulant little child. She continued, the preposterous charge that The Intercept's editors and reporters, with the lone noble exception of Glenn Greenwald, have betrayed our mission to engage in fearless investigative journalism because we have been seduced by the lure of a Joe Biden presidency. She says, just look at all of our stories, and that will suffice to refute those claims. But this dripping sarcasm, aimed at the guy who really founded the outlet that's now, I'm sure, paying Betsy Reed a princely or princessly sum to preside over the gatekeeper function. We began this week talking about Ben Smith writing in the New York Times about how the gatekeepers are back, and they successfully shut the gates on the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not heavily invested in the Hunter Biden story. But from everything I've read, no one has shown that the emails were concocted or were doctored. And so those emails are quite damaging to Hunter Biden and his daddy. And it is so infuriating to me that the Democrats have done it again. In 2016, we got the damaged goods and heavy baggage of Hillary Clinton. And this year, what do we have, 26 people who ran in the primaries? The party leaders, including Obama, elbowed everybody out of the way to be sure that Bernie Sanders could not get the nomination in favor of old Joe. And we knew about Hunter and Burisma. We'd been through impeachment. The Ukraine story was front and center. So I did digress there. Back to Betsy Reed attacking Glenn Greenwald. The narrative Glenn presents about his departure is teeming with distortions and inaccuracies, all of them designed to make him appear as a victim rather than a grown person throwing a tantrum. It would take too long to point them all out. For now, she says, it is important to make clear that our goal in editing his work was to ensure that it would be accurate and fair. While he accuses us of political bias, it was he who was attempting to recycle the dubious claims of a political campaign, the Trump campaign, and launder them as journalism. And that is such a misrepresentation. Because you can go to Substack and read the final draft that Glenn Greenwald was fighting with the editors over when he quit. And he very carefully shows that he's not recycling any kind of Trump bullshit. He is carefully analyzing what is clearly a late political hit, an October surprise, that may actually have some accurate elements to it. Now, I've heard a variety of claims that I haven't seen evidence for, such as Hunter Biden's laptop included child pornography. I've seen that on Facebook, but I don't know it to be true, and it's not something that Greenwald included in what I think was a carefully written piece. So then, damning him with faint praise. Quote, "We have the greatest respect for the journalist Glenn Greenwald used to be. And we remain proud of much of the work we did with him over the past 6 years. It is Glenn who has strayed from his original journalistic roots, not the Intercept." Now, this is such pap. Here is somebody who's been there, 3 or 4 years now? And she is so presumptuous as to declare that she's proud of much of the work? Well, I think Greenwald can be proud of almost all of the work. I can't summon an idea of something where I think he was hitting the black keys all the way through an article. But his very careful skepticism of Russiagate, as you know, is something I fully agree with. My only complaint was that he left the beat for a while. So then her final jab at Greenwald is, we have no doubt that Glenn will go on to launch a new media venture where he'll face no collaboration with editors, such as the era of Substack and Patreon. In that context, it makes good business sense for Glenn to position himself as the last true guardian of investigative journalism and to smear his longtime colleagues and friends as partisan hacks. We get it. And then she closes with a promotional plug that, well, she's just established is a lie. The Intercept's record of fearless, rigorous, independent journalism speaks for itself. Well, those same kinds of branding words are used over at Who, What, Why. And as you know, I submitted podcasts to Who, What, Why for a couple of years, and I never had any pushback until I submitted it. In fact, the way it worked was they asked me, hey, do you have any podcasts? Things are a little slow over here at the assignment desk at Who, What, Why. So I said, well, I've got this great interview with Scott Ritter, where we take apart the Russiagate narrative and talk about how it's beginning to crumble. And suddenly, I was descended upon by a bunch of editors that I didn't even know existed at Who, What, Why. And they pronounced that they were going to review my work. And what they actually did was criticize the blurb for the interview. I never had any solid indication that anybody in the virtual network that is Who, What, Why, it doesn't have an office, had actually listened to the podcast. And so, based on the summary that I wrote about the faults of the Mueller investigation, about the evidence that had surfaced regarding CrowdStrike, and that they couldn't prove that anything had been exfiltrated from the DNC servers. And also, in the same interview, Ritter was arguing that Mike Flynn's lawyers did have a technical, legal basis to ask for his charges to be dismissed. Well, this was too much for Who, What, Why. And they position themselves as a scrappy, independent media outlet committed to fearless investigation. And I said, look, label it opinion. And you can put up one of those disclaimers. The idiotic comments you're about to listen to are not necessarily those of the management. Every radio station I worked at used to run one of those before and after the shows I hosted. So, enough about me, but I want you to know that these independent media outlets, and I would include BuzzFeed, Vice, Who, What, Why, The Intercept, they posture as being different, that they're not gatekeepers. And I'm sorry to say that I've learned the hard way that that is bullshit. So I want to recommend Matt Taibbi's memo, his essay that he published yesterday. I've linked to it in the show file for this podcast. He is over at Substack, too. And I guess that Taibbi has formally left Rolling Stone, but I don't know the particulars of that. So if any listener does, feel free to share that with me in an email, would you? Maybe I missed a bloodbath that I should know about. And also, I want to point out that yesterday I misspelled the name of the number 2 editor at The Intercept. His name is Peter Moss, and it has 2 A's and 2 S's. I shorted him an S. Anyway, Taibbi, I think, does a good job of explaining the basis for Greenwald's complaint, for noting the shift at The Intercept when James Risen was added to the staff. He apparently gets $16,000 for every article that he publishes, and Greenwald doesn't feel that Risen is subject to the same editorial scrutiny that he is. And based on what Risen has recently published, that seems to be a fair statement. So Taibbi also notes, as Greenwald does, that the left-postured media has made this big shift, and I've noted it here, that spooks are our friends. And the people who lied to us during the Bush and Obama administrations are now highly credible, great Americans, patriots, who are out there to warn us about the creeping intent of Russia and other would-be adversaries. And Taibbi writes, after 2016, these officials presented themselves as norms-defending heroes, protecting America against the twin existential threats of Trump and Putin. Russia, just a few years ago described by Rachel Maddow as a harmless gnat on the butt of an elephant, is now reinvented as an all-powerful foe, mounting an influence campaign of unprecedented reach, with everyone from Trump to the Green Party to blogs like Truthdig and Naked Capitalism to Congresswoman and war veteran Tulsi Gabbard to Bernie Sanders, all potentially doing the bidding of a Cold War foe bent on sowing discord on our shores. Taibbi also digs up one of the initial statements that was used to brand and define The Intercept. Quote, the editorial independence of our journalists will be guaranteed. Our journalists will not only be permitted but encouraged to pursue stories without regard to whom they might alienate. And I think Greenwald is much more credible in blaming Betsy Reed for trying to prevent a story that would embarrass Biden than Greenwald being concerned about being edited. So I encourage you to read this. The other piece is we see David Frum attack Greenwald in a tweet. Also Ken Delanian, a discredited NBC reporter on the Pentagon and foreign affairs. And Delanian dings Greenwald for appearing on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox. And this is a common complaint where you get tagged by association. And the truth is that Greenwald no longer gets invited on MSNBC. He used to be a guest on Rachel Maddow's show from time to time, but since he took a different tack on Russiagate, no way. And the same is true of great people like Bill Binney, the NSA whistleblower, who's been a primary source for me in my skepticism of the Russiagate narrative. Rachel Maddow was content to smear him from her anchor desk, but would not put Bill Binney on her program to either defend himself from her criticism or to explain his much more plausible conspiracy theory about what became Russiagate than the official conspiracy theory. And it's interesting to see there was a brief one-page story in the New York Times about the Greenwald resignation and the general nature of the censorship complaint. And at The Guardian, based in Britain, which once was the home of Glenn Greenwald, it's where he took the Snowden documents originally, and when they caved in to MI6 and pressure from the U.S. government, Greenwald left. And that's when he formed The Intercept. So it's clear that The Guardian has an axe to grind. In an unsigned staff report, they give you the very basics. But here's one quote worth mentioning. Greenwald is a vocal critic of the U.S. media and American politics, with an abrasive style that has won him many admirers as well as a legion of critics. Recently, he's been especially critical of media coverage of the Russian attempt to interfere with the 2016 U.S. election, and has been criticized by some left-wing commentators for appearing on right-wing Fox News host Tucker Carlson's show. Just as I said. And the final piece I have on the Greenwald resignation is under the byline of Alan McLeod at Mint Press News. And I want to alert you that I'm including a link to Mint Press in the show file for today's podcast to this specific article. But when I tried to pull it up to confirm the link for my, when I post stuff on the website, I was blocked. It said that somebody is impersonating or could be impersonating Mint Press News because a web security certificate has expired, and that I should be aware that this party is trying to steal my personal information. Now, this may be an innocent episode where a certificate expired. Mint Press forgot to renew it. It's happened to me once or twice. But the idea that Mint Press wants to steal my personal information? How could they? Google and Facebook already have it all. So Alan McLeod's piece, I think, is pretty interesting. It's headlined, "The Knives Come Out as Greenwald Splits from the Intercept Citing Censorship." And McLeod opens with the reference to the contract that Greenwald has, stipulating that he has nearly complete editorial freedom and control over his content. McLeod writes, for its part, The Intercept ensured the event would be an extremely messy breakup, publishing an acerbic response accusing him of throwing a tantrum over, quote, preposterous charges. You've already heard the Betsy Reed screed. While some Intercept employees, like writer Ryan Grimm, attempted to steer a neutral path between management and Greenwald, others, like Naomi Klein, went on the attack. Glenn was not censored. He was edited, and edited well. Crying censorship is a marketing ploy to gin up subscribers for his new Substack. Are people really going to fall for it? And then, in a second tweet, where she retweeted a comment from Donald Trump Jr. She dinged Greenwald with this line: "Imagine not caring that you are feeding into this garbage at this point in history." Well, based on my conversation with Max Blumenthal about his report on the efforts to suppress the Michael Moore-produced Planet of the Humans and this garbage, I've lost respect for Naomi Klein. I thought she was a real independent thinker, a critical thinker. But by lumping Greenwald in with some sort of Trump propaganda, that's really a low blow and deeply, deeply offensive to me. Marcy Wheeler, who of course is a Russiagate promoter without, how can I put it? She sets her own standard for being in the tank for the Russiagate story. She congratulated everyone at the Intercept on the news, claiming a lot of good reporters have been unfairly tainted by Greenwald simply making shit up with impunity for too long. And that, too, is just totally unfair. I've never seen Greenwald make anything up. He sources his commentaries extremely well. And even if I didn't agree with them most of the time, my bullshit detector's pretty effective. And it's never gone off for a Greenwald piece. And back to the McLeod article, he notes that the Intercept burned not only Reality Winner, but Terry Albury, who shared documents from the FBI on its surveillance of journalists. And then again in 2019, the Intercept burned their third source, intelligence analyst Daniel Hale, who had shared top-secret documents with Jeremy Scahill. So I find it fascinating because this clearly separates the wheat from the chaff, the journalists from the stenographers. And again, you don't have to like Greenwald. You don't have to agree with everything he's written. But the idea that the entity that he founded would attempt to suppress his coverage on what we all have a right to know about. And it is so infuriating that the corporate media is ignoring the Greenwald story because, of course, it leads to their embarrassment over suppression of the Hunter Biden story. And I turn to The Guardian, and while I often curse them, they do some good reporting on issues here in the United States. And under the byline of Alex Horn, they reveal that they picked up a document from Facebook saying that Facebook moderators had to manually intervene to suppress that New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. And after they told us that they were going to fact-check the New York Post story and throttle back its distribution in the meantime, the document shows that the New York Post was given special treatment as part of Facebook's standard process. Stories can be enqueued for Facebook's third-party fact-checkers in one of two ways, either being flagged by the robots or being manually added by one of the fact-checkers themselves. The algorithm, the artificial intelligence, looks for signals, including feedback from the community and disbelief comments, to automatically predict which post might contain misinformation. Predicted content is temporarily, for 7 days, soft demoted in feed at 50% strength and enqueued to fact-check product for review by the third-party fact-checkers. Some posts are not automatically demoted because sites in what's called the Alexa 5K list, which includes content in the top 5,000 most popular Internet sites, are supposed to keep their distribution high under the assumption that they are unlikely to be spreading misinformation. But those guidelines can be manually overridden, and it appears that that's what happened in this case. And Facebook acts on only a few types of misinformation without checking with their fact checkers. Misinformation aimed at voting or census interference is removed outright. Manipulated media or deepfakes are removed. Well, but what about that Nancy Pelosi's drunk video? See, this is how inconsistent the enforcement of the putative standards at Facebook truly is. Oh, and they have a policy about vaccine hoaxes. Where groups and pages spread these widely debunked hoaxes about vaccinations 2 or more times within 90 days, those groups and pages will be demoted in search results. All of their content will be demoted in the news feed. They will be pulled from recommendation systems, and blah, blah, blah. So those are publishing functions. And in a moment, I'll get to our in-depth interview we're releasing today, where I raise the issue about whether or not Facebook and Twitter are publishers. But there's more being exposed about Facebook today. We're learning that during this presidential election, we don't know exactly when, but Facebook stopped recommending that people join online groups dealing with political or social issues. And this is just one of their efforts to make it more sticky, to keep you spending more time there. So if you liked an article about rhododendrons, Facebook would seize on that and say, why don't you join this rhododendron lovers group? But when it came to politics, they discovered from their own internal audits that they were recommending that people with leanings toward white supremacy groups join online white supremacy groups. Get this. In May, the Wall Street Journal reported that an internal Facebook researcher found in 2016, 64% of all extremist group joins are due to our recommendation tools. So, as they, very publicly and with a lot of flourish took down QAnon and took down the white supremacists, and now they're taking down Holocaust deniers and anti-vaxxers, it was Facebook's algorithms that populated these groups to begin with. It's really bizarre. London's Daily Mail tabloid gives us better coverage of Zuckerberg's comments to the Senate subcommittee this week than I found in the American newspapers. The Mail says Zuckerberg revealed he was warned by the FBI to be on the lookout for the spread of hack and leak disinformation, including troves of documents. And that's the reason why he permitted the special treatment, the throttling back of the initial report in the New York Post. Zuck said, one of the threats that the FBI alerted our companies and the public to was the possibility of a hack and leak operation in the days or weeks leading up to this election. Impressed by Senator Ron Johnson, who asked, did the FBI contact you and say the New York Post story was false? Senator, not about that story specifically, Zuck said. Why did you throttle it back? They alerted us to be on heightened alert around a risk of hack and leak operations around a release of a trove of information, Zuckerberg said. To be clear on this, we did not censor the content. We flagged it for fact-checkers to review, and pending that review, we temporarily constrained its distribution. Now, that's an editorial decision. It's publishing. And that's what they continue to try to duck, the responsibility and the legal liability of a publisher. Also, BuzzFeed tells us that a guy named Barry Croft, who is a truck driver from Delaware, one of the people indicted in the effort to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, and ultimately try her and execute her. Well, we're learning more, that he had been under FBI surveillance for at least 6 months, that he used Facebook to communicate with fellow travelers around the country, He used it to recruit people to some of the actions that he was contemplating. And when the FBI apparently contacted Facebook, got them to take down some pages, he would just set up a new one. One message that is reported from October of last year: I'm going to North Carolina Saturday to discuss going to war against the government of North Carolina. Please come out, bro. We need you. And what is slightly different from what we were first told about the plot in Michigan that was then expanded to include Governor Northam of Virginia is that this group wanted to go after Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump. I'm for hanging Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, he said this past June 24th. And so this group was willing to destabilize governments, whether they were run by Democrats or Republicans. And while it does appear that they were rather loosely organized, there was coordination, and there was a lot of chatter. And so this guy Croft reached out to the Wolverine Watchmen, who appear to be much more of a disciplined militia operation. They actually, practice being militiamen. So the Wolverine Watchmen had also been under surveillance for months, we now know. And this guy Croft also issued a challenge to people on Facebook. He said the Lock Up Your Governor challenge. Which of the beautiful colonies is going to be the first to snatch a criminal bastard? So these are anarchists. And they're not Antifa, so Trump wouldn't have any interest in them, right? Also, this article says that there was some sort of alliance between the Wolverine Watchmen and the Boogaloo movement, that the Michiganders called themselves part of the Mujahideen. And there's also another group that surfaces here, the Michigan Militia of Love. Wow. Sounds like that's a group. It's almost irresistible. So all of this about social media is my lead-up. It tees up my new in-depth interview recorded earlier today with filmmaker Leslie Iwerks. And her new film is called Selling Lies, and it takes us back exactly 4 years, when we were told that there was all this disinformation and foreign influence in social media. And she didn't go to Russia. She went to Macedonia. It's now technically North Macedonia, and the town of Veles, V-E-L-E-S, which turned into a hub for clickbait operations. And, as the film depicts, these young Macedonians were hungry for clickbait cash. And they first began by creating fake news or spun up cotton candy news about Hillary Clinton. They didn't make much money. But when they attacked Hillary, and when they promoted Trump and his memes, they made a boatload of money. They created over 1,000 fake news sites, and this single area generated $50 to $60 million in 2016 alone. And as I discussed with Leslie Iwerks, this was a much more sophisticated and professional operation. They hired American writers to create their posts and their articles at fake news sites. And it had the potential for much more impact than anything that we know of that came out of Russia. Now, I would say that my impression is that Leslie was pretty sold on the Russiagate narrative until I bent her ear a little bit. And so I do encourage you to listen to the full interview. And here's an excerpt from my conversation with Leslie Iwerks about her new film, Selling Lies.
For me, I went into this project, for me to go all across the world and go and try to get people to talk to me that are fake news writers, that are trying not to speak to the press, that are kind of bunkered in their homes and hiding out and, underground and doing all these things and meeting privately in secret. And, that's what they're all doing. They know what they're doing is wrong. But to get them to talk was definitely a feat. And, for me to go in was without prejudice and a bit of anger about what they were doing was a challenge. And I really did go in thinking, okay, here's what's fascinating about this story. Trache, as you'll see in the film, is an entrepreneur. He's a 20-something entrepreneur. He did really well. He hired employees in America. He figured out how to do it. He partnered with his brother. He saw there was a way to make money, and he was also feeling like if Trump got elected, it would be better for Macedonia. Not sure why, but that's how he felt. Yeah. So he did, and so I treated him as an entrepreneur. I looked at him as an entrepreneur, and I really had to take away and sap the morality out of my body because I had to listen to him as if I was completely neutral.
Yeah.
And that was a fascinating place for me to be. And I think that's a really great place to be as a filmmaker in many ways because you can get the truth out of people. And he told me things that he's never told anybody else. And I think that was what the takeaway is of the film, which is as the filmmaker, I'm not trying to tell you, the audience member, what to feel. You will feel what you want, whether you're on the left or the right.
That is filmmaker Leslie Iwerks. She is the producer, director, and editor of Selling Lies, and she made an offer at the end of the podcast today where she said through Election Day, you can watch her film for free. All you have to do is go to sellingliesdoc.com. That's sellingliesdoc.com. And I'll put a link in the show file for the podcast to make it easier for you. And when you get there, you're looking for a part of the page that offers you a free pass. And I think you have to submit an email, and they then send you the codes so that you can watch it on iTunes or wherever else it's available. And I do recommend you watch it. It's only 31 minutes long. She takes you to Macedonia, introduces you to these entrepreneurs, including some who think they did a great service to America from Macedonia by helping get Trump elected. And the bottom line is, in the film, without any prompting from me, she said there was no Russian connection to these fake news operations that sprung up in Macedonia in 2016. Well, we're being told that the ransomware attacks on at least 9 hospitals across the United States in the past 3 weeks are coming from a Russian-based criminal gang. The snoops, snoops, not spooks, who try to track down these bad actors, have tagged them as UNC 1878, and others call them Wizard Spider. So they've hit 9 hospitals demanding multi-million-dollar ransoms. And this is truly insidious, and it's badly timed, not only with the election occurring, but the spike in coronavirus cases that is going up in 42 states right now. So there's one in Sonoma County, just north of me. There's a hospital in Klamath Falls, Oregon, the Sky Lakes Medical Center, where they have had to go all paper. And it appears that hospital had actually rehearsed. They had practiced for an incident like this, and I commend them for that. The other hospitals that have been infected with ransomware include those in New Jersey, Georgia, Florida, Massachusetts, Texas, and Arkansas. And the ransom demands by the group last year ranged from $5.5 million to $12.5 million. And it appears that TrickBot, a so-called botnet of infected computers, and Ryuk, it's spelled R-Y-U-K, a type of ransomware, are the special sauce that facilitates these ransomware attacks. So it appears to be real. The attacks are. The blame on Russia? I'm skeptical. You can blame almost anybody for a cyber attack, and the footprints or fingerprints can be scrambled or erased in ways that really make it almost impossible to prove. So Chris Christie was the victim, he got punked. In exchange for $200, which he assures us was going to charity, he signed on to a website called Cameo. And they pay people like Christie and others to shoot videos that say certain things that people are paying them to say. So Christie delivered the script that he was asked to. It was a message to some guy named Greg. And Christie was scripted to encourage Greg to return to his former home in New Jersey. And so Chris Christie shot the video, and he said, "Hey, look, Greg, come back to New Jersey. Think about everything we've got here. Taylor Ham, Bruce Springsteen, Bon Jovi. We got the Jersey Shore and the boardwalks. We got all that stuff back here that's waiting for you, but more than anything else, Mike and your whole family, they want you back here." And the final line was, he threatened to go and grab him and bring him back to New Jersey himself and said, "I don't think that's what you want, Greg." Well, it turns out that Greg here is the Republican candidate for governor of Montana, Greg Gianforte. He's the Republican member of the House right now who, after he got elected 2 years ago, punched out a reporter. He's a really great guy. I think he should take Christie's advice. Phone home. Go back to the Garden State, please. So I've been ranting and raving about the Supreme Court's micromanaging of election law this week. And I want to thank Robert Barnes, a court watcher over at the Washington Post, because he actually explains this better than I've been able to. And fundamentally, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, has specific standards about what states are inviting the interference of the Supreme Court and which states are operating in ways that make them immune from it. And this has to do with the scattershot approach to the rulings related to the deadlines for election offices receiving mail-in ballots for them to be valid. They've allowed extensions to remain in place in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, but not in other places, like Wisconsin. So it gets really confusing. But the bottom line is to Roberts, while the Pennsylvania applications implicated the authority of state courts to apply their own constitutions to election regulations, this case involves federal intrusion on state lawmaking processes. Different bodies of law and different precedents govern these two situations and require in these particular circumstances that we allow the modification of election rules in Pennsylvania, but not in Wisconsin. Now, I do understand what he's saying, but the outcome is ridiculous. The idea that Pennsylvania can allow their voters to put a ballot in the mail and have a different date when it's legally received, but not Wisconsin? I mean, it's all because of the same issue, the pandemic. And so this is the kind of textualist interpretation, the originalist bullshit, that's going to get even more prevalent. Amy Coney Barrett declined to participate in these cases, and I'm grateful for her judgment on that because she's not up to speed on them. But you got your Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh, and they're all hot and bothered because they are using a textualist approach, which enables them, with a straight face, to issue these incoherent and inconsistent rulings. And you know what? We haven't found bottom yet with the Supreme Court or with Trump's reelection efforts. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People have been generous over the years, and it means a lot to me. I want to thank Jerry Fresia and his lovely wife, Cheeky. They've been subscribers for a long time. Judy Holloway, Ben Brotman, Carla Mahoney. They've all been chipping in $5 or $10 a month for as long as I can remember, and I'm grateful to them. And by the way, as I wind down my podcast here, the daily will end a couple of weeks after we see the resolution of the election. And I plan to do some exit interviews with some of my favorite guests and with some listeners. So that's how I plan to wind this down. I just don't know the exact timeline because I'm not in control of the election process. So there's a good essay by Nozomi Hayase over at Consortium News today, lamenting the lesser of two evils choice that we get here, depicting Trump as the worst. She's quoting Noam Chomsky here, as he depicted Trump as the worst malignancy ever to appear in our political system, and he urged liberals to engage in strategic voting. If you don't push the lever for the Democrats, you're assisting Trump. And like Hayase, I shared my little rant with you yesterday. I'm really offended when somebody tells me how I should use my vote. And no matter where you are within the sound of my voice, your vote is your own. And you should not be shamed or intimidated into voting other than you wish to express your own beliefs and preferences. So I think she does a good job of trying to let the air out of these arguments that we all have to fall in line and accept the orthodoxy that Joe Biden is the only way forward. And I got a great dispatch from my pal Pepe Escobar. He is the ace offshore commentator who knows American politics better than Chuck Todd or any of those other buffoons on television. And he wrote a really powerful piece here that I think you need to find. I'm not able to link to it because he sent me a Word doc, and he talks about what happens on November 3rd. And he looks at the potential of a Biden administration. And he's sharply critical here. You may wish to avert your eyes and your ears if you're the kind of person who, has decided you're going to just go with Biden and you don't want to hear anything else about it. But Pepe writes, Obama-Biden's geopolitical accomplishments include a drone war, a Hellfire missile diplomacy complete with kill lists, the failed Afghan surge, the liberation of Libya from behind, the proxy war in Syria fought with moderate rebels, and once again leading from behind, the Saudi-orchestrated destruction of Yemen. And Pepe goes on to say it's safe to game that a Biden-Harris administration will oversee a de facto NATO expansion encompassing parts of Latin America, Africa, and the Pacific. And he frames all this around what is called the blob, and that's a term that was coined by Ben Rhodes, the National Security Advisor in the second Obama term. It's applied to the incestuous Washington foreign policy gang, think tanks, academia, newspapers, and Foreign Affairs magazine. So he says, in contrast, two near-certain redeeming features would be the return of the U.S. to the Iran deal and restarting nuclear disarmament negotiations with Russia. That would imply containment of Russia, not a new all-out Cold War, even as Biden has recently stressed on the record that Russia is the, quote, biggest threat, unquote, to the U.S. Then he shifts to Kamala Harris. She's been groomed to rise to the top from as early as the summer of 2017. Predictably, she is all for Israel. Kamala's a hawk on Russia and North Korea. She didn't co-sponsor legislation to prevent war against Venezuela, and you can call her a quintessential Dem hawk. Yet Kamala's positioning is quite clever, reaching too diverse audience. She totally fits into the blob, but with an added woke gloss, trendy sneakers, the advertised affection for hip-hop, and as an extra bonus, she directly connects with the Never-Trumper gang. Then he shifts to speculation about who will populate a Biden administration. He says the key blob character in a Biden-Harris White House is Tony Blinken, former Deputy National Security Advisor under Obama. He said Susan Rice was unceremoniously dropped from the VP shortlist. She may become the next Secretary of State. She's competing, he says, or thinks, with Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Then, close to Tony Blinken is Jake Sullivan, who was very tight with Hillary Clinton. And then she singles out the queen of the blob, Michelle Flournoy. She, of course, was a deputy defense secretary under Obama. And she is Tony Blinken's partner in a lobby shop. And they're called West Exec Advisors because, as Pepe knows from his perch in Bangkok, West Exec happens to be the name of the street alongside the West Wing of the White House. So he does a brilliant job of forecasting. And it's interesting because today's Friday New York Times includes some forecasting on who might be in a Biden cabinet. And they cover the whole waterfront, but on foreign policy, they agree with Pepe on Tony Blinken. They also mention Jake Sullivan, but they didn't mention Michelle Flournoy. So I give the advantage there to Pepe. Also, Caitlin Johnstone published just a list of one-sentence items today. Some of them are two. Let's read a couple here. If your ideology requires slow incremental change while humanity hurtles toward extinction, you don't have an ideology. You have a pastime while waiting for Armageddon. The Corbyn anti-Semitism psyop was exceptional in that it wasn't just the political media class knowingly promoting a lie, but members of the rank-and-file public as well. Next, you won't stop fascism by electing Joe Biden. You'll just help make sure it uses racially sensitive language while stomping you on your face. Yeah, vote Biden, or else the government which destroys any nation that disobeys it might start sliding into tyranny. Well, you get a flavor for her current jaded mindset. So the Postal Service is performing just the way the Postmaster General wanted it. The big Trump donor, Louis DeJoy, who took over in May, did everything he could to slow down mail delivery. And this is one of those wins for Trump. Over the past 5 days, the on-time rate for ballots in 17 postal districts representing 10 battleground states and 151 electoral votes was down to 89%. That's 6 points lower than the national average. And currently, 28 states will not accept ballots that arrive after Election Day, even if they're postmarked before. But in the Detroit Postal District, ballots were delivered only 72.8% on time over the past 5 days. But in the white sections of Michigan, on-time delivery is 84%. In all, 12 of the 17 mailing districts recorded on-time ballot delivery rates below 95%. Voting rights advocates say that even the 5 districts with on-time scores over 90 are underperforming. Now, as of Thursday, the Postal Service said it had processed 4.5 billion pieces of political mail, like those campaign ads and deceptive flyers that you receive, and 122 million ballots. In Michigan, 77% of absentee ballots have already been returned. In Wisconsin, that rate is 84%. And in North Carolina, it's 61%. So there are a lot of people who got the word not to rely on the mail and not to wait until Election Day to cast their vote this year. I'm pleased to report something I speculated about the other day. And that is that there are several labor federations, like in Rochester, Seattle, and Western Massachusetts, that have passed resolutions saying that they are prepared to call a general strike if, after November 3rd, it's clear that Trump lost, but he is refusing to concede and to make plans to move. So I consider that to be good news. I think that we've seen a lot of activism over this past summer around Black Lives Matter and police killings, mostly of black men. But I don't detect an appetite on the part of most Americans to fight over election outcomes. And I'm sorry to put it that way. Trump is planning a big election night bash. It was going to be at his hotel, the Trump International, down the street from the White House. But the mayor of Washington, D.C., has clamped down and said the most people you could have is 50. So Trump is pouting, and he's threatening to hold it at the White House, which, of course, would violate the Hatch Act like he has before, and nothing will happen if he does. Also, Joe Biden is stepping up his direct attacks on Trump, making sarcastic references to Trump's claim that he is a stable genius. In Des Moines today, he referenced the president's unfounded claims that wind energy is linked to cancer, his reference to airports during the Revolutionary War. It's the same guy, this is Biden, it's the same guy who said, by the way, you think I'm making this up, when he was advised about the increasing hurricanes coming across the Atlantic because of the warm water, he said maybe we should drop a nuclear weapon on them. Holy mackerel, Biden said, channeling the boy wonder. Biden also mocked Trump's intellect Thursday with another reference to Trump being a stable genius. So in Louisville, to add insult to injustice, the cop who actually fired the bullet that killed Breonna Taylor, Jonathan Mattingly, a sergeant, he has filed a lawsuit against her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who fired the shot that hit Mattingly in the leg. And this claim of police exceptionalism, Mattingly posing as a victim in a case that he and his blue-shirted colleagues bungled so badly. And, of course, they flatly claim that they announced themselves, that they knocked, and there are no witnesses, including the boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who support that. So this is a travesty. And Mattingly is saying he's entitled to compensatory damages for his medical treatment, trauma, physical pain, and mental anguish. You started it, asshole. I mean, this kind of deflection, it plays well in states where white supremacy is still a thing. Well, I want to commend some Senate Democrats. They're calling on utilities, gas and water services, and telecommunications companies to voluntarily halt all utility shutoffs for the duration of the pandemic. The request was made in a letter today to 21 of the largest utility companies, signed by Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and others. And because there is no national standard related to forbearance on utility bills, there's an estimate from the utilities themselves that 179 million Americans are not protected against losing their services by the end of the year if Congress doesn't authorize additional spending. Now, the non-payment of these bills is a hit to the utilities. And I understand that. But here we are in winter, and to cut off heat, to cut off water supplies, and even communication services would be deadly for many people. And I appreciate the Democrats are raising these issues. I saw Kamala Harris on with Trevor Noah on The Daily Show last night, and I thought she presented herself quite well. Some of her empathy came through, but in a kind of generic way. And she didn't cite the plight of people who are facing eviction today, and the people who now owe back rent that hasn't been backfilled by any federal money. And so they may end up in bankruptcy. They're likely to face eviction. Many of them have no savings. And as I mentioned the other day, we're going to see a huge growth in homelessness in this country. So Don Jr. was chatting it up with Laura Ingraham on the Fox News channel last night. He said that we've turned the corner in fighting COVID. The deaths have dropped to almost nothing. And Ingraham agreed with him. It's gone to almost nothing. Well, Don, I don't want to school you too badly here. But yesterday there were 1,055 deaths attributed to coronavirus in the United States. There were 90,000 new cases identified, bringing us over the 9 million mark total. And the total death count in the United States now exceeds 228,000. Yeah, it's nothing. Now to our COVID-19 daily update prepared by Linda Lewis. The U.S. hit a new record for a single-day increase in infections at the 90,000 number yesterday. Johns Hopkins data shows that since the pandemic first hit, there have been a total of 9 million cases across the country. A recent analysis from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington says that about 2,250 Americans could be dying every day by the middle of January. If states do not react to rising numbers by reimposing mandates, cumulative deaths could reach 514,000 by the middle of January. Wow. The fall-winter surge should lead to a daily death toll that's approximately 3 times higher than now by mid-January. Hospitals, particularly ICUs, are expected to be under extreme stress in December and January in 18 states. And El Paso is the epicenter. It's also the scene of a tug of war. Because in Texas, the top dog in each county is called a judge, and they're elected by the people. I don't know if they actually preside over a court, but they're essentially the county managers. And Ricardo Samaniego is the judge in El Paso County. He ordered a 2-week shutdown of all non-essential businesses, and that is being countermanded by the state attorney general, Neanderthal knuckle-dragger Ken Paxton. He said that the judge's order violated orders from the governor. Quote, Judge Samaniego has no authority to shut down businesses in El Paso County. This is a direct violation of Governor Abbott's executive order. We are exploring all legal actions. The judge acknowledged his shutdown has contradicted the governor's order, but he said he consulted with a lot of people. I feel we stand in strong, sound legal ground to do what I need to do at this point in time. So it's pretty tragic that in a case like this, where El Paso is overrun because we have an election on Tuesday, they want to play politics. They want to get those Trump people out there who believe that they are immune. And so it goes. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have set the stage for the return of the cruising industry. Yeah, don't you want to sign up for the Love Boat right now? They're going to let the no-sale order expire in exchange for a conditional order. And does it say when? Not exactly. Cruise ships will have to prove to the agency that COVID protocols are working, and trial runs must be conducted before passengers can return. Regeneron Pharmaceuticals said today it's paused a clinical study of its antibody drug to treat some of the sickest COVID-19 patients. The recommendation from an independent monitoring board marks the second time a clinical trial has been paused because of safety issues. Regeneron said it is pausing enrollment of patients receiving mechanical ventilation or intense oxygen after the independent monitoring committee observed a potential safety signal and unfavorable risk-benefit profile at this time. No, I don't understand what that means either. NPR has obtained documents that show detailed information that hospitals report to the Department of Health and Human Services is being reviewed and analyzed but not being shared beyond a few dozen government staffers. Only one member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Admiral Brett Giroir, appears to be receiving the documents directly. And these are details of the trends in hospitalization, the rate of the population, available beds, issues related to ICU. And Ryan Panchadsaram, sorry, sir, co-founder of the website COVID Exit Strategy and a former data official in the Obama administration, says, "At this point, I think it's reckless. It's endangering people. We're now in the third wave, and I think our only way out is really open, transparent, and actionable information." The Washington Post is reporting that nearly 8 in 10 nursing homes where people have died of the coronavirus are being cleared of any responsibility or legal liability. Those cleared included homes with mounting outbreaks before or during the inspections. Homes that received a clean bill of health earlier this year had about almost 300,000 cases and 43,000 deaths among residents and staff. And that toll constitutes roughly two-thirds of all fatalities linked to nursing homes from March through August. Inspectors reported violations at 3,500 of these nursing homes, ranging from dirty medical gear to a lack of social distancing. Here's an example. For failing to ensure staff members wore masks, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Sterling Place, which had 80 cases and 15 deaths, was fined only $3,000. For failing to separate residents in a common area, Heritage Hall, Leesburg, Virginia, which has had more than 100 cases and 18 deaths, fined $5,000. The New York Times published a big expose on the front page of Friday's paper, which shows that while the Obama administration refused the requests of Turkey's President Erdogan to shut down an investigation and prosecution of a Turkish bank called Halk Bank, that the Trump administration played ball. And Attorney General Bill Barr, one of the reasons that the prosecutor from the Southern District of New York, Jeff Berman, was fired, was that he refused to drop a case for political reasons against this Turkish bank, and it was related to violation of U.S. sanctions toward Iran. What it shows is that Bill Barr will do whatever the president asks. And other officials, including John Bolton, are quoted as being aghast at this effort to kill a case for political considerations. It's quite a story. And finally today, I get these promotional emails offering me interviews with fascinating people. And one came in yesterday, and it's based on the betting line in Las Vegas. So political watchers have bet about $15 million on the presidential race at an online betting exchange called Smarkets. And Trump holds only a 34% chance of winning the election. Biden has a higher volume. If he wins, the average payout will be $1,400. A Trump win would be $710. I don't know what the minimum wager there is. And the betting line predicts that Georgia could turn blue. Florida is giving Trump only a 53% chance of carrying the state. And Susan Collins in Maine, according to the gamblers, it's time for her to fold her cards. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. You find it on YouTube. Have a great weekend. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.